Dear colleagues and friends, I would like to welcome you to the webinar organized by the Institute of European Studies and which we titled 30 Years Since Operation Storm, History and Perspectives. For those colleagues and guests who were not with us 5 years ago, I wish to say that our institute, on the initiative of our former director, Dr. Miša Đurković, also organized a very successful and interesting webinar in July 2020 on the occasion of the 25 years since Plan Z4 and the Action Storm. I'm very glad to say that some of our speakers who will take part in our webinar today also participated in the webinar back then, so we are actually establishing a sort of tradition here. So we are very proud to have such esteemed guests for our discussion today on a topic that is both very painful and, I can freely say, also traumatic for the Serbian people, and which still is counted as a very recent history in both our country and the region. However, we will do our best to approach this sensitive topic with academic objectivity and clarity, and we are sincerely hoping for vibrant and respectful discussion later on during our Q&A session. Now, before I pass the floor to our director, Dr. Slobodan Zečević, and our esteemed participants, I would like to give a brief introduction of our guests and speakers at today's event. First of all, it is my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Peter ГАЛБРАЙТ, former ambassador of the United States to Croatia, and someone who was present on the ground during the 1990s in former Yugoslavia as both a diplomat and a witness to the tragic events that unfolded in the region. It is also my pleasure to welcome Professor Dr. Mile БЈЕЛАЯЦ, Principal Research Fellow at the Institute for Recent History of Serbia, and until recently also the director of that institute. He is also one of our leading experts on the history of the disintegration of the Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, as well as on the history of military-civilian relations and comparative history of Southeast Europe. Next, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Boјan DIMITRIJEVИси, Principal Research Fellow at the Institute for Contemporary History, who is also a recognized and respected authority on topics from the military and political history of Yugoslavia and Serbia in the 20th century. And last but not least, it is my pleasure to welcome colleague Vladimir РУСИси, who is an expert in geopolitical and anthropogeographical systems. Now, as I understand, we are having some technical difficulties in connection with colleague РУСИси, so we will know in a few minutes if he is going to be present or not. And now I would like to pass the floor to our director, Dr. Slobodan Zečević, who will give the welcome address. Director, you have the floor, please.
Thank you to Mr. Filipović. I want to address a special thanks for all to the all participants today, especially to Mr. Peter ГАЛБРАЙТ, the former ambassador of the United States of America in Croatia, who was witness and political actor of the tragic events 30 years ago. As I said, it passed 30 years of the Croatian operation, military operation Storm, during which 250,000 Serbs, citizens of the Republic of Croatia, were expelled from this country in just few days. Several thousand Serbian civilians, more than 2,000, I think, were killed in this operation, mostly people aged over the 64 years, who believe that due to their advanced age, they will not be victim of reprisals by Tudjman's army. After the genocide of Serbs in the independent state of Croatia during the Second World War, this is one of the most serious crimes against the Serbian people in recent history, for which none of those responsible can be legally convicted. Immediately after it, there was the seizure of Serbian property in Croatia, including citizen of Croatia, Serbian, but also Serbian company who had very important properties in Croatia. Operation Storm was symbolic in many ways. It's marked the end of the together life, common life of Croats and Serbs in territory of Croatia, and definitely buried the Yugoslav project that was based on the unity of those two peoples. Dear participants, in the name of this CS webinar, we remain open to hearing different opinions, different stands about these tragic events. In that name, I wish you we will have a successful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your words and greetings. Do we have colleague Rusic or no? Or our technical service tells us that we will have Mr. Rusic online. So he is to give us a brief overview of the history and current status of Serbs on the territory of modern Croatia. If colleague Rusic, if you have the floor and time frame of around 10 minutes, if that is all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, to apologize for these small technical problems. It was for the first time with this Zoom, and but thank you for finding an alternative solution. So, before today's session, first to thanks to all participants today, because it is very important this anniversary of 30th anniversary, and also special thank to Mr. GALBRAYT, who is again with us after 5 years when we had a similar webinar. Let me start with the presentation. So, this presentation, the aim of this presentation is to sum up in a longer historical period political-territorial different shapes of the Krajina throughout different socio-historical periods. The point of this presentation is actually to show different phases and different more or less similar statuses of the local ethnic Serb on the territory of modern Croatia, basically comparable to today's situation. The one common fact is that during all that time, Serbs has kind of special status in Croatia. Let's start also from the facts about the presence of Serbs in Croatia in the big numbers. So the first, let's say, sacral objects that are evidence of such a presence basically were established in 1317 and 1350, which are Serbian Christian Orthodox monasteries Krupa and Krka in today's Dalmatia. As you can notice here, those years are before Kosovo battle. So the theory which says that Serbs came to Croatia only after Kosovo battle is just partially true, because as we can see, they were populating those territories even before. Military Krajina actually was formed and existed for almost 350 years, from 1533 to 1881. That military Krajina, borders of military Krajina are technically overlapping with former territory of Serb Krajina to the extent of the 80% or similar to that. Then we have 1627 year where the privileges to local Serbs at that time Habsburg Empire was granted by the emperor, because the whole point was to be a border against penetration of the Ottoman Empire into the Europe. That's why they got privileges, but in return, population in those parts of military Krajina were obliged to fight against Ottoman Empire. Ethnic composition of the population in those areas were mixed, but predominantly populated by Serbs. In 1645, as continuation to that, we have so-called Morlak or Serbian status in Dalmatia, and then on 1867. Even Croatian autonomous parliament issued a statement on equal status of local Croats and local Serbs. Then in 1887, Latin and Cyrillic alphabet got equal status in Croatia and Slavonia by the law. At that time, Croatia and Slavonia basically were one territorial unit, and Dalmatia was other territorial unit. Dalmatia was under direct control of the Vienna, while Croatia and Slavonia under the direct control of Budapest. Then we have, unfortunately, in 1945, between 1945 and 1945, pogrom of local Serbs in so-called independent states of Croatia, which at that time also had a whole Bosnia and Herzegovina into its composition and the whole region of Srem. After that, we have in 1990 Association of Municipalities with Serbian majority as a foundation of Serbian Krajina. That was basically a response of the first steps of the dissolution of former Yugoslavia, whereas Croatian parliament and basically Croatian political leadership was moving Croatia toward less and less strong connections with the federal government, and then as response to that and as basically a desire to get some kind of autonomy, cultural autonomy, and some form of territorial autonomy, Association of Municipalities with Serbian majority was formed. Even between 1992 and 2000, existence of Knin and Glina autonomous units were in Croatian legal structure. So even during the time of Serbian Krajina, when that territory was not under control of Zagreb, basically Zagreb recognized autonomous rights on a paper, autonomous rights of Serbs, and then applied to only Knin and Glina autonomous units. However, Knin and Glina autonomous units you can recognize later on as a part of Krajina that were covered by a famous plan Z4, which creator was Mr. Galbrayt, and he will tell you more about that, I suppose. If we can move on. Thank you. In 1995, we know all of what happened: Operation Storm and demographic catastrophe in Serbia and Krajina, when in only 4 or 5 days the vast majority of population was basically expelled and left territory of the former Serbian Krajina. We can move on. In 1991, so before the clashes and conflict in Croatia, census data showed around 582,000 Serbs in Croatia. And in 2011, which is only 20 years later on, census data showed around 187,000 of Serbs in Croatia. So such a big population was basically not compensated by any return of refugees in a big amount of returnees, neither with populating those areas by Croats, for example, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, because to be honest, those areas were basically economically passive areas. So for Croats from Bosnia and Herzegovina who moved later on to Croatia, it was more attractive to settle down closer to the Adriatic coast, or maybe around the Zagreb and big centers, Sisak, Karlovac, and so on, not basically in depopulated rural areas of Serbian Krajina. We can move to another slide, please. Okay, this is just a map to show the territory of former military Krajina that was used as kind of basis for creation of the Serbian Krajina. Of course, the borders are not overlapping entirely. However, they overlap in majority of the territories which were inhabited by that time by Serbs, Croats, but the majority were Serbs in those areas. Next slide, please. Now we see here Croatia and Slavonia territorial units that were formed like that under Austro-Hungarian Empire, basically under a direct control of the Hungary, the Budapest, and red color represents Serbs, and blue color represents Roman Catholics, meaning Croats. So you can see that the territorial distribution of the Serbs on those maps are stable through the longer period of time. There were no changes in that sense. In the numbers, yes, but not in the sense of the territorial distribution. Next slide, please. Here we see a religious or the religious map of the former kingdom of Yugoslavia from 1921, according to the census 1921. If you focus on territory of modern Croatia, you will again see the blue color, which represents the Serb population, and then you will also see that more or less we are talking about the same territories. Next slide, please. Yes, this is a similar map, but from the 1931 religious composition of Kingdom of Yugoslavia at the time, whereas you can see again this territorial distribution of Serbs also in Croatia, modern day Croatia. Municipal borders are more or less similar to modern, but I will also just make a focus. Please pay attention to Slunj municipality. That's the this purple municipality next to the green, which presents Bihać enclave. So this is important because this Slunj municipality was not taken into account as territorial connections between two counties with Serb majority during the designing of the Z4 plan, because at the time when the Z4 plan was created, Slunj municipality changed ethnic structure, so it was more Croats than Serbs. Not much more, but still more, which was the result of different demographics, including also the demographics of the pogrom during the Second World War, when that ethnic balance changed drastically, which would basically look differently on the design of Z4 plan if Serb majority remained majority in Slunj. So there would be like territorial connection between two regions, Glina region and Knin region. Next slide, please. This is basically ethnic map of Croatia from 1991 at the time of the Declaration of Independence of Croatia. So you can see with these dark colors basically composition and percentages of the Serbs in those areas. Next slide, please. And now you see the situation from 2011. You can see the big difference in basically presence and the number of Serbs in those areas. And now they are scattered in different counties. So Serbs technically does not comprise majority in no basically in no county in Croatia at the present day. Not even in those two counties which were considered as a nucleus of the Z4 peace plan. I think that was the last. Yes. Thank you for your attention, and hope that I fit into the 10 minutes limit.
Thank you very much, colleague Rusić. Thank you very much. It was exactly 10 minutes, so we appreciate a lot for sticking to the timetable. And so colleague Rusić gave us very interesting briefing on the history and current status of Serbs in the Croatia today, and I'm sure that this more than helped to set a stage for our further discussion on this topic. Now I would like to pass the floor to His Excellency Peter GALBRAYT. Your Excellency, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Well, thank you very much. And here we are 30 years after the events. And there are quite a few commemorations this year, especially since for the 25th there couldn't be because of COVID. And I realized that if you want to participate in the 30th anniversary of great events, it helps to have been young at the time of the great event. There are ever fewer people who participated. The Z4 plan, of which, as you point out, I was the principal author, what began as a process. The first phase was one organized by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Vitaly Churkin in the Russian Embassy in Zagreb to try to bring about a permanent ceasefire between the Krajina region and Croatia, and it took place over a couple of two separate sessions. Tudjman asked me to participate. The other participants were, of course, the Russians, the European Union, I guess it was, European Union, and the United Nations. And we succeeded in creating a 2-kilometer separation zone and a ceasefire. But we recognized that that was not going to be sufficient. The status quo couldn't continue. So the next phase, and this was led by David Owen and Torvald Stoltenberg, was to, but I was also a participant in that, to create economic and confidence building measures. And frankly, the Serb leadership in the Krajina did, and particularly Milan Martic, were not serious. They didn't want to participate in that. And they engaged in the most juvenile, infantile tactics. For example, there were 2 Serb journalists who came to cover the ceasefire negotiations. It was agreed the economic confidence building negotiations would begin a couple of weeks later. This would have been April in 1994 in Plitvice, which was under the control of the RSK. And the Croatians said, we're going to bring down some journalists. We'll bring 5, which is a small number. Now, the Serbs said, well, we only had 2. You want to bring 5? We're not going to allow the talks to take place. I mean, it was absurd. The truth is they had 2 because they only had 2 journalists. There were hundreds of Croatian journalists. They had reduced it to a small number. It was a ridiculous reason to not have the talks take place. But it was because they actually were not serious about having the talks. And so at that point, in the summer of 1994, I realized that military conflict was going to happen unless we could put forward a peace plan, and that the peace plan needed to be very detailed to show the Krajina Serbs what was possible within Croatia, because there was never a chance that they would get what they claimed they wanted, which was an independent state of the Republika Srpska Krajina. So it was an extensive autonomy plan. And it was not put forward, it was not designed as a take it or leave it plan, but as a basis of negotiation. And we knew that a lot of it, I knew, was not going to be acceptable to Croatia, but we wanted to show, to Tudjman, we wanted to show what might be possible. And so it included basically control over, education, local government. The police would be controlled by the Serbian authorities. Basically, Croatian authority would exist. They would have their own power to tax. Could provide their own social services, and the Croatian authority would be at the control of the international borders and of the military, but it would be a demilitarized zone, so the Croatian army wouldn't be there. And there were many other details of the plan. They made a big issue about how the Croatian currency, the kuna, was the same currency that had been used by the NDH. And so I put into the plan the notion that they could have their own banknotes, not their own currency. The currency would still be set by the central bank in Zagreb, but they could have their own current banknotes, which would be dinars, but monetarily they would be the same as kuna. There were lots of things like that. And when we presented it to Tudjman in January we got endorsement, presented it to Tudjman in January of 1995, you could see he was steaming about it, but he said what he had agreed, and of course I'd spent a lot of time talking to him, that yes, they would agree to negotiate about it. Went up to Knin and met with them for hours. Martic, the so-called president, acted as if we presented him with a big pile of manure. He said, I can't touch it. And then he said, how do you expect me to look at something I haven't read? Well, here, read it. No, can't. We spent hours trying to persuade him to do that. And at the end, uh, he said, and this is a guy who's had a high school education, was a policeman and a thug. He looked at me and he said, "You think you're professional diplomats, but you made a huge mistake." And I'd had it, and I replied, "A huge mistake has been made, but we'll see who made it." And it was clear who had made the mistake. I also want to say, and then, there were the external events that took place in Bosnia, Srebrenica, and then you had Martic attacking Bihać. So after the Srebrenica massacre, what we saw was then attacks both by Mladic and Martic on the Bihać enclave. And you had 8,000 men and boys massacred in Srebrenica. Bihać was 4 to 5 times larger. So we were looking at 30 to 40,000 potential people being massacred if the same behavior took place. And at that point, with no prospect for a peace negotiation, with the prospect that Bihać would fall unless NATO intervened, and NATO was not prepared to intervene, the alternative was to not object. We didn't give a green light to the Croatian military operation. We simply didn't object. But of course, let's be honest, 30 years later, not objecting was understood by Tudjman and the Croatians as a green light. And then you had what happened. I tried desperately in the last few days to head off Operation Storm, to find I went to Belgrade, I met with Babic. Babic apologized to me for the attacks on Bihać. He said, "I can't understand why we're doing." He agreed to negotiate on the basis of the Z4 plan. He agreed that the autonomy arrangements would be far less at that point, but by then, frankly, it was all too late. In diplomacy, you have to seize the opportunities. The plan was definitely had its shortcomings. We needed to operate on norms, on a principle that could be sellable to both sides, but also to the Croatian side. Hence, Sloan, we couldn't go back to the 17th century. We couldn't go back to 1940. We had to operate off the 1991 census. And so the autonomy provisions applied to those areas that had Serb majorities in the 1991 census. And that's why the plan had something entirely different for Eastern Slavonia, which didn't have a Serb majority. And so you had arrangements that were not so dissimilar to what are in the Erdut agreement. I just want to add one other thing to this, or two other things to this discussion. It was a huge tragedy for the Serbian people of Croatia. But it's also important to remember that in 1990 and 1991, the Krajina Serbs and the people in Eastern Slavonia expelled the Croats. And when I went there in this period between 93 and 95, there were all these empty homes, burned out homes that had been Croat homes. And of course, after 95, then there were the burned out homes of the Serbs. And so it's basically an abandoned area. And it's sort of the epitome in my mind of Mahatma Gandhi's statement, "An eye for an eye leaves everybody blind." And of course, Tudjman hoped it would be inhabited by Croats from Bosnia and Herzegovina. But why would they want to go there when they could go any place else in Croatia? And then after Croatia became part of the European Union, they could go any place in Europe. The second point I would make is that as part of our diplomacy, after Operation Storm, and I did this personally, highlighted the destruction of Serb homes, the killing of the stragglers, of the old people. I went there, and we pushed Croatia and President Tudjman very hard on the notion that these people were Croatian citizens, and that they were therefore entitled to return to Croatia and to recover their property. He called them optanci. They had opted out. And in the end, Croatia did permit people to become citizens, to recover their property. Many chose not to come to Croatia. The figures you cite of the decline of the population. But many also came back, got their Croatian citizenship, and have gone elsewhere in the European Union. just as Croatia's population has fallen by about 20% since Croatia entered the European Union, not because of declining birth rates so much as people choosing to go for better opportunities. Let me stop there. I'll add one further thing, actually. Sorry if you'll allow me. The Z4 plan failed, but the ideas were the basis of the Rambouillet plan for Kosovo, which was also rejected by Milosevic, and but actually went into effect in a place that I've been very much involved in for 40 years in Kurdistan, and I was part of that, where the Kurdistan region has basically very similar autonomy and self-government that was envisioned for the Z-Plant plan for Krajina.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is always very valuable for us to hear from the first hand on how some events were unfolding, both from the perspective of the United States, their respective diplomats, and in general, the key political and other regional figures from that period. I'm sure that this will generate interesting questions later on from the audience. And now we will continue with our discussion. I would like to invite next Professor Dr. Mile BÜYELAYAC. Professor, you have the floor in around 50 to 20 minutes, please. Thank you.
Colleague Filipović. I entitled my paper "In the World of Geopolitics and Double Standards, Acts and Assessments of Ambassadors Involved in Balkan Affairs and Possible Reassessment in Aftermath." For the occasion, I could speak as a witness and as a professional who dedicated considerable efforts to cope with the history of the 90s. That is to say, for some 30 years now. I took a part and was a team leader in the US-led project Yugoslav Controversies Revised. Family background, studies and work experience in one of the highest institutions in Croatia enabled me personal insight in the political and academic community and the media. It helps me to better understand and assess circumstances and foreign actors involved in the 1990s. What disturbs me the most is announced prospect that historians should not be able to tackle current narratives on sensitive topics in regards to Yugoslavia and Yugoslav drama 1990s. Simply, they suppose to adopt already promulgated parliamentarian declarations or current court decisions, or even the spokesman claims during the press conference in a wartime. I cannot imagine that someone still sticks to the first verdict in a Dreyfus affair or an other political motivated affairs in the last century. These notions I have borne ever since I started to deal with the sensitive topics in the numerous international and domestic projects, conferences, writings, and as well polemics. Reading the later memoirs of Warren Zimmerman, William Montgomery, White Book, The United States and Croatia, Documentary History, 1992-1997, covering the time of the Peter GALBRAYT service in Zagreb, I wonder how they were briefed by their State Department before coming to an office. What knowledge, even biases, they had about the Balkans and its past. Finally, what were the real tasks they came up with? More precisely, what did they know about real goals of their country's policy? It's not unusual that country or institutions run policy of so-called twin tracks approach, when their ambassador was kept in the dark. It is not rare that the geopolitical goal is in conflict with the great principles of democracy, international law, human rights, equality of nations, religions, and races. So we became powerless witnesses of double standards aimed at concealing unacceptable interests. New world order or unipolar world we locals have experienced mirrored itself in the huge backup of the global media. We watched how the most extreme political groups, parties, and even terrorists were promoted as allies in the fight for democracy and overthrow of dictatorships or breakup of sovereign states. Democracy that brought death to millions, helpless, and crippled countries for a long time to come. In the words of Madeleine Albright, who'd been asked by Leslie Stahl at CBS TV, May 12, 1996, to comment 500,000 deaths of Iraqi children due to the severe sanctions, and ask her precisely, was it worth it? Albright responded, I think this is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it. End of quote. She was the one who reclaimed Srebrenica and supposed 8,000 dead at a UN session. It would require more space and time to cope with former and recent attitudes of His Excellency Peter GALBRAYT, former ambassador in Croatia. I will stick to a few published examples and one personal experience if I have a time. There are notes about the conversation between Nora Belov and Ambassador Darko Tanasković with the newly appointed ambassador to Croatia, Mr. Peter GALBRAYT. The conversation was held in the Committee on Foreign Relations of the US Senate. Aforementioned duo brought with them some 1,000 files with the proper documentation on Serbian victims in Bosnia, especially Bratunac and its surroundings, killing between spring 1992 to 1993. They were accepted by the State Department and CIA as well as by some media at the time. All of that was due to the termination of Mrs. Nora Belov. For Ambassador Tanasković, as he later recalled, it was eye-opening experience. Quote, my most unpleasant but probably the most useful meeting was the one with the former American ambassador to Croatia, Peter GALBRAYT. At the time, I visited him in May 1993 together with Nora Belov. Peter GALBRAYT was polite in an offensively icy way, with occasional flashes of the forced joviality, certainly due to the presence of Nora Belov, an institution in the world of Western journalism, from whom he had to at least somewhat shy away. I communicated to him extremely carefully and without value judgments some lesser-known facts about the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with an emphasis on the suffering not only of the Muslims but also of Serbs in the sub-region. I also presented him with authentic documents, first-hand material. He listened to everything without saying a word, with his facial expression ranging from disinterested to boredom, with the occasional less expression of complete resignation. When I finished my presentation, ready to offer him if he wanted and further information, he moved on, asked me if that was all, and then, without waiting for the answer, said something that stuck so deeply in my memory that I can quote him. Another quotation. Mr. Professor, thank you, but you should know that you fought a war against the will of America and the international community, and that you won the war, but it is Pyrrhic victory. We, for now, do not have enough interest to engage directly on the ground in order to change the outcome of this war. But you know, not only you and your children, but also your Children's children will suffer badly because of it. End of quotation. And Tanaskovic continued, I remained grateful to Galbraith for undiplomatic brutality with which he threw in my face the most important thing for understanding the attitude of an influential hawkish wing of the Washington administration towards the Serbs in new era. He helped me a lot to understand in time of the essence of globalization in American way. Nora Belov was wholeheartedly for the Serbs because she could not stand an ideological lie, end of quotation. This testimony from 2000 was supplemented by Tanaskovic more recently with the new details, which are partly contained in an official report to the President of Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, then Dobrica Ćosić, after this visit. From those subsequent materials, we read that a message was conveyed in Langley that the dossiers was done professionally, but that it would not change anything in the US attitude towards the conflict. Quote, director of the CIA. The cards were dealt a long time ago, and you got the weak ones. End of quote. Okay, I will do my best. The ambassador and other high-ranking US officials seem to have forgotten the ambassador Warren Zimmerman persuaded Alija Izetbegović to withdraw his signature from the Kutiljeros plan on the cantonization of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which everyone had previously agreed to in Lisbon. This opened the door to war. It was forgotten that the Serbian people were a constituent people and not a minority in Croatia in 1990 and Bosnia in 1992. Serbs were denied that right. In Croatia, they are becoming a minority despite the status they have had throughout the entire history. In Bosnia, Izetbegović, in accordance with his Islamic declaration, wanted a unitary Islamic state. The chronology of the first shots is also known. In terms of history, especially the Second World War in the territory of the independent state of Croatia and the genocide that the regime carried out against Serbs, Jews, and Roma, it seems that the ambassador was uninformed. How else to explain that in his brief speech on May 8, 1995, celebrating 50th anniversary of the ending of the Second World War, laying a wreath in the Jasenovac Memorial Center, where at least 146,000 civilians were killed, and probably more, he did not mention which country organized that crime. According to him, quote, it was the greatest evil mankind had ever known, an evil that produced, among other evils, the Jasenovac concentration camp, end of quote. According to him, it was, quote, full horror of Nazism, end of quote, probably in order to please his hosts. But it was core issue that moved Serbs in 1990 and 1991 when unnamed force of the past took power. Even high German representatives, no mention in Italian, once protested against bestialities and practice of extermination of whole Serb population during the war. The occupiers had their own interests. They knew well what had pushed Serb masses into the resistance movement in whole independent state of Croatia. Well, we can excuse ambassador because book 1941, A Year That Returning, written by Slavko Goldstein, Jew, publisher and survivor of Ustaša persecutions, has been published later than 1995. Well, I will skip what I prepared because I didn't know the time frame in advance. Thank you. Maybe I should add something later on.
Thank you, Professor Bjelelajac, for for your contribution to the discussion. I'm sure that we will have a very interesting Q&A session after that with lots of perhaps questions and comments. And finally, I would like to pass the floor to the Professor Dr. Bojan Dimitrijević. Professor, you have the floor, and please also around 15 to 20 minutes maximum, just to keep in the time frame. Thank you.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for today's conference and an opportunity to talk with Ambassador Galbraith. I hope that he is listening us carefully on the other side. I was studying the American policy towards the Serbian side in the wars of Bosnia and Krajina, and this year, with a colleague from Institute, we wrote a book about the army of Serbia and Krajina, and maybe I will say that I'm fully in the subject. I will not comment any comments given by Ambassador Galbraith, since in many ways I understand his points, and on the other side we may argue, but it's 30 years on, and there is no too much to improve concerning the events in '95. So I have around 8 questions for Ambassador Galbraith. I don't know if he's going to hear it well. And first, my question is, since I found extracts from his diary and his oral testimonies on events on his political career, why he did not publish a kind of memoirs or kind of testimonies. I would like to be titled Undiplomatic Diplomat, as somebody called him, since there is many important issues that should be understood. Actually, Ambassador Galbraith was the first American ambassador in the former Yugoslavia who openly have different policy, a different attitude rather than previous U.S. ambassadors in former Yugoslavia, which is of note, obviously. My second thought was when Ambassador Galbraith explained how he came to Yugoslavia and how he looked at telly with the events in Sarajevo. Sometimes in the spring '92, he comments that he regretted somehow that Serbs should be attacked by NATO or U.S. military. Is it his opinion, or it was the reflection of the change of the American policy, since the United States firmly backed existence of Yugoslavia until spring '92? Following question that I have for Ambassador Galbraith is more or less a comment. Comparing to the international invoice which appeared in Bosnia and former Yugoslavia, we may conclude that U.S. diplomats, starting from Ambassador Galbraith, have different approach. They were not neutral. They were not hypocrites as European envoys. So they were proactive with the pressure on the belligerent sides, on local sides. Once it was air power, using of their power mostly against Serbs. On the other case, it was Washington Agreement, which actually is example of different behavior to those parties which actually listened to the American voice. And this Washington Agreement, actually, which is some kind of outcome of Ambassador Galbraith doing in Bosnia, is very interesting, especially for the Serb side, since 1993 was actually peaceful for Serbian military there, since Croats and Muslim forces clashed each other. And mainly, in most of the cases, Serbian and Croatian forces did not have too much quarrel and too much fight since between, let's say, May '92 and late '94. Those, let's say, my four first questions. Other four questions are linked to the 1995 aggression of Ukraine or Operation Storm. Whoever wants to call a different name, use it, please. I would like to thank Ambassador Galbraith that he pointed out very interesting occasion that he oversee while visiting Ukraine by helicopter, by plane, by the car, whatever. And then he gave in many of these comments and memo, or not to be, or wannabe memoirs, let's say, a comment that Kraina was empty, that there was no too much people seen on the streets, that not too much people seen on land, that there front lines of Kraina force were empty. And this is very, very peculiar, a very exact opinion about our Serbian fellow brothers in Kraina. So they were actually 40 times less than the Croatian state, and no matter the hardware, they lack the manpower. It was actually the sign for the Croatian side that attack, aggression, or whatever will be much easier than thought. I have specific question concerning to a visit to Belgrade on the 2nd of April, which Ambassador Galbraith mentioned when Babic excused himself and Martic and so on because of the Z4 plan.
2nd of August. 2nd of August.
2nd of August. You visit Belgrade and you met Babic there. It's very interesting meeting, and how it happened, I would like to comment on this one. The other point, which is very, very interesting for me, is that on the day, 2 days later, when the Croat forces started with the artillery fire and aggression or attack, whatever, around 16:30, President Martic and commander of the Krajina army, General Mrkšić, they called Prime Minister Babic. And Babic said over the phone that, I will try to quote, so they ask what they going to do in these circumstances. And Babic said that he have a talk with, this is telephone call which was typed and later published. He said in this fashion, around 15:30, I spoke with Ambassador Galbraith and I got the message that Croatian forces, and quote, no chances to stop, which is interesting. So I'm wondering if you have a telephone call with Babic on that first day of Croatian attack on the 4th of August. On the other side of the telephone, Martic and Mrkšić a little bit were not a little bit confused about it, and which was actually a sign that Krajina people should start to evacuate. So they were a little bit of a small talk between themselves, and then again ask Babic on this one. And Babic said, do as you should do upon the plan. And again repeated, Ambassador Galbraith said the Croats have no chance to stop. And then after evacuation started, let's say 10 minutes after the telephone call, the Supreme Command of the Krajina decided that withdrawal of the evacuation of the Serbian population should start from North Dalmatia. And finally, I would ask Ambassador Galbraith why he, through the time, changed the opinion about the question of Banja Luka. Because in the 95, he understand that Banja Luka fall into Croatian or Muslim hand will be disaster. But then later on, I think that he a little bit changed his mind. That probably since the existence of Republika Srpska and then internal political problems of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Could you comment all these questions, Ambassador? And thank you very much for your appearance here in Belgrade.
Professor Dimitrijević, for your comments and contribution to the discussion. Now we will break with the protocol a bit, because we will not start immediately Q&A session. I would like to give the floor to His Excellency if he wishes to make a comment or any kind of further contribution to our discussion before we move to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There are some very good questions there to which I'm not sure I know all the answers. There's one thing about history, which is that it's written looking back, but it's lived moving forward. And so when you write it looking back, there's always an assumption that there was some intelligent design to what happened, but a lot of it doesn't work that way. So one of the questions was, how was I briefed? I had briefings, but I had actually no instructions. And it was an odd situation, new administration. And the closest I had for instructions were my statement that I delivered on presenting my credentials, which said that we supported the territorial integrity of Croatia, and we wanted peace and human rights. And maybe there were some diplomats who would take that as an absence of specific instructions. I figured everything fit within the rubric of peace, territorial integrity of Croatia, and territorial integrity of Croatia and Bosnia, and support for human rights. And one of the things we consistently did was to link the territorial integrity of Croatia to the territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that we supported the territorial integrity of Croatia to the extent that Croatia supported and recognized the territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. There's enormous sense of that there was some kind of grand design or conspiracy on, a secret U.S. government plan for the Balkans. The Clinton administration came in. They were focused primarily on domestic issues. The President Clinton had won the election on the phrase "the economy stupid." He did not want to get engaged in the Balkans. To the extent there were, foreign policy issues, certainly the number one was Russia and wanting to have the transition at the end of the Cold War from the Soviet Union to a democratic Russia. But he was confronted daily with what was going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina, including on television. It made Europe and the United States look weak, but particularly with regard to, and a huge amount of time was spent in the National Security Council and State Department focused on Bosnia, very little on Croatia and very little on the Krajina issue. So a great deal of what happened was things that I initiated, that I would report to Washington and get very little response, but in the end, Washington supported it. To go to the specific questions, why not publish a memoir? I suppose I should, I guess I hope to do that in the coming years. Part of it is that immediately after my tenure in Croatia, almost immediately after, I went to East Timor, where I participated in bringing that territory from being to independence. I became the first foreign minister of East Timor, or member of the, and so there was that, and then came Iraq. And I did write a memoir of my involvement in Iraq and with the Kurds. But you're right, I should do this, and there are diaries and documentation. With regard to U.S. policy on the Yugoslavia, well, I think this is pretty well known that Bush, President George H.W. Bush, his administration opposed the breakup of Yugoslavia. James Baker went to Belgrade on the 21st of June, 1991. He met with all the leaders of the republics. He warned them against breaking Yugoslavia, said the U.S. would not help, but it was too late. You know, Croatia and Slovenia had already voted for independence, and what he probably should have warned was, what he definitely should have warned was against a war. The question of whether U.S. diplomats were neutral or different from European diplomats, yes, I think that's a fair point. We were not neutral. In Bosnia, we supported the Bosnian government. We considered that the Bosnian Serb army, Mladic and Karadzic, were criminals committing war crimes. They engaged in the brutal actions of ethnic cleansing. And so, yes, we wanted to see them defeated. We wanted to see Bosnia and Herzegovina remain as a sovereign, independent state. The Washington Agreement which I participated in, and it wasn't just what took place in Washington, but basically it was the focus of my work from the moment I arrived in Croatia. I presented my credentials on June 28th, 1993, until the negotiations that took place in Washington, I guess in March of 1994. It was focused on trying to end what was then known as the Muslim-Croat War, and then now referred to as the Bosniak-Croat War in Bosnia, and to build an alliance between the two groups. And that's exactly what happened. And in turn, from the Washington Agreement came a series of additional steps that turned the military tide in Bosnia. And that included there were a series of things, but let me say the impact of the Srebrenica massacre was huge. In November of 1994, the Krajina Serbs and the Bosnian Serbs were attacking Bihać. And Tudjman and Šušak asked me to come to, Granic and Šušak, I should say, asked me to come to meet with them. It was a holiday, actually, November 11th. I was on the coast. I came up, and they said, we would like to relieve the siege of Bihać. We're going to go through Slun. And what would be the attitude of the United States, and would you prevent sanctions against us? I wrote a cable presenting that and saying that while we shouldn't endorse the military action, we shouldn't oppose it, and we should make clear that, as long as there were not atrocities, we would oppose sanctions. I got a very, very angry response from the State Department and from Holbrooke, saying nobody wants a wider war. So my instructions were to tell Tudjman not to do it. Actually, when I did, Tudjman said, "You're right." But when the same issue arose after Srebrenica, the United States took a different position, and that was entirely because of the Srebrenica massacre. The U.S. took the position that it would not stop the Croatian military action, which incidentally was presented to us not as taking over the entire Krajina, but as a military action through Slun to relieve the siege of Bihać. But of course, we knew that wasn't what it was going to be. We knew it was going to be to take over the entire Krajina. I absolutely did warn the Croatians that they had to protect UN personnel and civilians. The question on Operation Storm, you know, what was very interesting to me was that, I actually went to the Kraina and constantly, and basically I saw there was nobody there. There were no defenses on the other side of the line. The CIA estimates were that this would be a prolonged military campaign, and that there would be guerrilla war following the Croatian if they succeeded. I didn't see that, and of course, but the difference was that the guys from the intelligence community, they never went there, and I actually went there. Sometimes, you know, you can study an area from books, from all sorts of other sources, intelligence, newspapers, but there's nothing like actually seeing it. How did the meeting with Babic happen on August 2nd? I knew after Srebrenica, I think it was July 21st, Šušak had told me of the plan for what became Operation Storm. And I attempted, on the one hand, I took the view that we could not allow Bihać to fall. And so I participated in the split agreement, which was the agreement between Izetbegović and Tudjman to permit the Croatian army to go up the Livno Valley, which put them both in position for Operation Storm, but also to relieve the siege of Bihać. But after, I'm trying to think about these precise dates, but at a certain point, the siege of Bihać had ended. And at that point, I then hoped that it would be possible to find a peaceful settlement to the Kraina issue. I had gone down, I think it was on the, don't hold me to the precise date, but I think it was the 1st of August, maybe 31st of July, 1st of August, flew down on a helicopter to Brioni to see Tudjman to present the U.S. position, which was went something like this. We appreciate the fact that you're willing to spend blood and treasure to relieve the siege of Bihać. We understand why you're doing it. And then I added, you know, warnings about protecting civilians and protecting UN personnel. And at that point, I told him I'd been in touch with Babic, and Babic had said to me, I wanted to go to Knin and see the leadership, Martić and Babic and the prime minister. And I guess Babic was the prime minister at this point. And Babic had told me Martić won't see you, so you can't come to Knin. You're not going to be welcome there. But could we meet in Belgrade? Well, to go to Knin was never a problem for me, and I didn't need to clear it with Washington, because as the ambassador to Croatia, I could go any place I wanted in Croatia. But to go to Belgrade, I needed a country clearance from the U.S. chargé in Belgrade. So I got on the phone to the chargé through the State Department Operations Center, since there was no direct line, to ask. And at that point, Holbrooke, who was on vacation in Colorado, broke into the call and discussed the situation. He said, well, you should ask Tudjman if you should go, which I was pretty sure Tudjman would say no. But okay. So I couldn't give an answer to Babic then. I guess it was the next day then I went down to Brioni to see Tudjman. And in the course of it, I mentioned the possible trip to Belgrade. And I was sure Tudjman would say no. Instead, he said, oh, that would be quite interesting. You should do it. Which, to be honest, was not a wise thing for him to have said, considering he had already decided on military action. So I go back to Zagreb. I call the UN to arrange flights to Belgrade. At which point Tudjman has his deputy press secretary call me to say he's changed his mind, doesn't think you should go. So I call the State Department in Holbrook and they say I shouldn't go now. And Holbrook says, we're not going to let Tudjman tell us what to do. We're the United States. You should go. So I went. It was late in the day. I think it was about 6 o'clock. It was me and Babic and Jeff Hovenier, my note taker or assistant. He was later the U.S. ambassador to Kosovo. And Babic began by saying, as I said earlier, I can understand why Croatia's about to attack us. I can't understand why we're attacking Bihać. And I said to him, the Z4 plan, you'll never get that anymore. That's off the table. But are you capable of saying that you'll negotiate on that basis, knowing, and I have to be able to tell this privately to Tudjman, that it will be much less? And he said yes. I said, then this was the 2nd of August. I said, you have to have a press conference and say this publicly on the 3rd. And he agreed. He tried to see Milosevic. Milosevic wouldn't see him. I think Milosevic had decided that he wanted Operation Storm to proceed and to solve the Krajina problem militarily. That was Babic then had a press conference. He didn't go really as far as I hoped. There were meetings in Geneva. And the Serbian delegation there said nothing about what was agreed with Babic. At that evening, about 6 o'clock on the 3rd, I was asked to come up to see Tudjman. This was on the eve of Operation Storm. I wanted from my government a strong statement saying that he should hold off for a couple of days to see if Babic. If the Babic plan would work, what I had agreed with Babic. I didn't get those instructions. I think at this point Washington had decided that Operation Storm should go ahead. Nonetheless, I did say if you go ahead, people won't understand what happened. Tudjman had some discussion. We know this because the tapes of his office meeting at that time have gone to the War Crimes Tribunal. Mir Jujul basically said, I'm getting a different message from Washington. And he was right. But I was doing what I could to try to give a few more days for a peaceful settlement. And even at that point, probably the early part of the operation was already underway, so it would have been very difficult to stop. Finally, on the issue of Banja Luka, this is one of the most difficult decisions that I was involved in. We had instructions to go see Tudjman to tell him to stop the military offensive. However, Holbrooke felt that he was under no obligation to follow those instructions. And he and I had a discussion at the residence. Would we go ahead and tell Tudjman to stop or not? And Holbrooke was of the belief that that there was that the Banja Luka leadership of the Republika Srpska was different than the Pale leadership, and therefore more reasonable, and therefore that was a reason not to have the Croatian military take Banja Luka. I didn't believe that, but I believed it was a potential humanitarian disaster if the Croatians took Banja Luka and you had the entire population trying to squeeze through the Posavina corridor. And of course, this would have included many people who had just fled from the Krajina region. And so, in fact, we stayed with the instructions and we told Tudjman to stop, and the Croatians did, in fact, not proceed toward Banja Luka. You ask why I think, in retrospect, because you might have gotten a better arrangement for Bosnia and Herzegovina had what were murderous fascist leadership, criminals like Martic and Karadzic, convicted criminals, of course, at this stage, had they been wiped out. As you had with the military defeat in at the end of World War II, a military defeat of these guys might have allowed for a fresh beginning for Bosnia and Herzegovina, including a multi-ethnic Bosnia-Herzegovina. Finally, and switching back to one of the earlier questions, which was about Jasenovac, it's very funny that this is the interpretation of what happened, what I did on May 8th in Jasenovac, and I guess it just shows, you can find conspiracies any place. On May 8th, 1995, Tudjman wanted to have a commemoration of Bleiburg. Bleiburg was the occasion where the Ustashi soldiers and civilians surrendered to the British in Austria, and then they were sent back to Yugoslavia, and many were massacred along the way, and Croatia described this as the Way of the Cross. I did not want to participate in a ceremony that honored the Ustashi soldiers or commemorated this. So I made a separate point, which was to go to Jasenovac, which had just been retaken by the Croatian military in Operation Blitz, and to lay a wreath there to the victims, which included Jews, Serbs, and others, Roma, and I'm sure I mentioned them, even if your colleague there didn't have my speech. But that's why I went to Jasenovac. It was to make a separate statement about the end of commemorating the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, and not to have it be about Bleiburg. There was quite an event. There was a huge number of press there. The area around the Jasenovac memorial was mined. The journalists were stepping off the path. I was afraid they would blow themselves up, and me too. But anyhow, and finally, of this discussion that supposedly took place in May of 1993 with Nora Beloff, I think that's just fiction. I have no memory of it. It would have been, at the time I was on the staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'd been nominated to be ambassador to Croatia, and like any sensible person who's nominated for one of those positions, you do not engage with people from the region while you're pending your nomination, because you can only get in trouble that way. And since I worked for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the very committee that would be confirming me, I knew this better than anybody. I just think that whatever was said was fiction, and I certainly don't remember meeting Nora Beloff or whoever was with her, but then again, that was a long time ago. All right, well, that's what I have to say in response to the various questions or points that were made to me.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your comments. And with this, I would conclude our first part of the webinar. And as it is tradition, we will start with the Q&A session. And since we have both guests online and in the live in audience, I would like just to briefly go over with a couple of the rules for the discussion. First of all, please introduce yourself when asking a question with your name and affiliation. If you're online, you can write question in chat, and if you're in the audience, please come closer to the microphone on the table so the people online. Oh, we have actually a mobile microphone, which is great news. So that is pretty much it, and I'm now opening the discussion. So first of all, do we have questions from the... Yes, Professor, please.
Now, Ambassador, I have a small question. I will repeat it. Do you have a knowledge that you have telephone call from Prime Minister Babić of Krajina on first day of Operation Storm? I'm asking this because when he said that to President Martic and the Chief of the Army, they decided to road the ordered that Serbian population should evacuate. If Babic lied, or you have telephone call with him on the 4th August in the afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I have no recollection of having a phone call with Babic that day, and I think it's extremely unlikely. We anticipated rocket attacks on Zagreb, which is what had happened in May at the time of Operation Blitz. So we had evacuated the embassy to the residence on the hill. We were operating out of the basement. Babic would have had no way to call me because there were as you know, no telephone lines between Zagreb and Belgrade where he was, or maybe he was back in Krajina. So, you know, I think I don't remember it, and I don't think it happened. I then had a conversation later in August from Belgrade with the Krajina Serbs who wanted to revive the Z4 plan. This was Operation Storm, and of course I had to say, forget it. I mean, that's gone. But that then became the start of the negotiations that led to the Erdut agreement.
Thank you. Do we have other questions from the live audience? No. Then do we have some questions in the chat? Maybe from our esteemed speakers. Director, would you like also to perhaps pose? Yes, Professor, please, you can ask.
I'm glad to hear from you, Your Excellency. What was the principal reason for you to choose Jasenovac, not Bleiburg? But my comment went, you didn't mention what kind of state were behind the experience of historical experience of Jasenovac, that is independent state of Croatia. But what I'm wondering, going through your files, it's a too small room dedicated to Operation Flash that occurred 3 months before the Operation Storm. And I'm wondering why is that? And in aftermath, what is your assessment of what kind of operation it was? Meaning what the message to the Serbian people by behavior of Croatian troops and especially towards civilians being delivered to the rest of the Krajina. In that way, Western Slavonia was finally completely incorporated into the system of Croat state, but at what price? And I have many sources. It's not and personal ones. It's not place here to discuss. It could take a long time. But in a brief, can you put some comments after all that on how you see and how you assess that previous operation and how that operation affected even some military endeavors from side of Krajina Serbs and Bosnian army Serb? Thank you.
Yeah, let me talk about Jasenovac. As ambassador, I repeatedly denounced the NDH. And I also, if you will, interfered in the domestic affairs of Croatia to voice objection to the idea that President Tudjman had of making Jasenovac into a monument for both sides who fought in what he considered to be the Croatian Civil War, that is, the monument to the fallen partisans and to the fallen Ustashi. He modeled that on what Franco had done in Spain. And again, I objected strongly and publicly, and I think if you examine the many interviews I gave during my time as ambassador to Croatia, you will find that language and also vehement denunciations of the NDH. So I think there's no issue there. In terms of Operation Flash, a significant part of the I went there immediately after the after Blitz took place, and there were people taking refuge or detained in a school and so on. But a significant part of the Serbian population remained after Operation Blitz, and the local leader was a fellow named Jakula, and we actually engaged in programs. At first, we funded legal defenses and lawyers to help the Serbian population who remained to protect their rights to get citizenship. And we also funded aid projects, and this was a personal one of mine. Maybe I'll at a little break, I'll go show you one. But we funded an agricultural project that produced what was called wartime brandy, because the plum brandy blossomed in Serbia and was harvested in Croatia. And that was just one of the projects to help the local population. And we had a number of them, but that was kind of one of the more humorous ones. So, I think what took place in Blitz was different than what happened after Storm. I denounced what happened after Storm, as I suppose many people in Croatia know. I rather famously got on a tractor with Serb refugees who were fleeing across, and this, what had happened was that the day the arrangement had been reached in which the Serbs were allowed to go from the Krajina region to eastern Slavonia or to Serbia on the autoput, on the highway. But as they passed into Sisak, which was the first town outside of the Krajina region, they were attacked by a mob. And the mob, I'd been there actually that day, but before these attacks took place. And that morning I had a story from the Associated Press which described the attack and which described how a thug had thrown a brick through the windshield of a car, and a mother picking shards of glass out of her baby's blanket, and as well as a couple of people were killed, and the police were smoking and laughing. And I was really outraged, so I went up to see Tudjman. I read the Associated Press story to him. And then again, without any instructions, but I said, in any normal democratic country, the interior minister would have resigned or been fired for this. And Tudjman got very angry with me. It was an emotional moment. And so I said, well, if I'm going to go down and join the refugee convoy, and you see what happens if the American ambassador's attacked. And once I said it, I realized, of course, I had to do it. You don't do these things in secret, so we gathered up all the press, and there were lots of them. And I went down, and it was my plan to drive in my armored car with the convoy of refugees, the American flag flying. But it was a very hot day, and we were walking up and down the line of the refugees, who were many of whom were on tractors. And I was handing out water, and there's a very amiable guy who had been a garbage collector in Karlovac, but then in '91 crossed over to the Serbian side. And he invited me to ride on his tractor with his wife and 2 children. And so I accepted. And I have to tell you that when we crossed from Petrinja, which is where they were, to Sisak, there were policemen every 2 meters, and the crowd were restrained. There were no attacks. I think the people witnessing, because it was a well-known figure, they're, oh, Peter, Peter, and then they began to wonder what I was doing. So that became one of the most well-known incidents of my time as ambassador to Croatia. A year later, Tudjman denounced me as a Traktorski diplomat. And when my tenure was up, there were, of course, a series of parties, farewell parties, and my daughter, who was about a year old then, she actually was born on the first anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement. That child left Croatia with more toy tractors than any child has ever had.
Thank you very much. We now have a question from the audience, and before I pass the microphone, I would just like to encourage our online listeners to also ask questions if they want with the chat function. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Alexa. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Petar Ćurčić, and I'm research associate here at the Institute of European Studies. And also, I'm professional historian. My MA is about Croatian right-wing politics at the very beginning of the 20th century. So I'm personally interested in this topic. So, dear Excellency, I would like to ask you 2 questions. Probably they are not dealing with the problems of wartime or actually the Operation Storm, but actually is dealing with a Serbian minority and the minority rights in general. So my first question is about Serbian minority outside Serbian Krajina, or actually in Tudjman's Croatia during the war and after the war. I assume that you have the connections and professional ties with them. So what was their position towards Krajina? I'm actually curious about position of Milorad Pupovac circle and their personal interest, and not only in these minority parties, but actually within the 2 major parties, especially in the Social Democratic Party of Croatia. So that's my first question. My second question is about Serbian municipalities, Joint Municipalities Council, which was formed after the peaceful reunification of Danube region into Croatia at the very end of your term in Zagreb. So, what are your thoughts about the success of that initiative, especially when we see actually that Serbian minority has facing severe struggles, especially with a Cyrillic script and using their alphabet in administrative and the schooling options. So that is my second question. So is the peaceful reintegration of that region actually successful in historical perspective, or not, dealing with this kind of the problems that we face these days? So thank you very much in advance.
Thank you for those questions. I consider the peaceful reintegration of Eastern Slavonia, Podunavlje region to have been very successful. It is the one place in the former Yugoslavia where where control of a territory changed hands, and the nation losing control, the people, the ethnic group, or whatever, losing control, remained. And that was the goal of the Erdut Agreement. I was the author of the Erdut Agreement, but of course, great credit also goes to the UN mission that administered Eastern Slavonia for 2 years, and frankly to Croatia and to President Tudjman. We had differences, but who made sure that, who supported the Erdut Agreement and made sure it worked, and for that matter also to the local Serb leadership. So it is. I just wish that something like that had been possible for the entire Krajina area. But from the point of view of people rather than territory, half the Serb population in the so-called RSK actually lived in Eastern Slavonia, Baranja, and Srem. In terms of working with the Serb population in Croatia through this period, and particularly Milorad Pupovac, I worked very closely with them. And I sought their advice. I sought any connections that they might have or any influence that they could use with the leadership in Knin and also with Milosevic. The leadership in Knin was basically not interested, or they didn't have the courage to look for a peaceful settlement. And I came, it was hard for me to understand why, faced with the certainty of military defeat, why couldn't they agree to negotiate on a plan that actually offered them so much more than what they were going to end up with after a military defeat. And it's something I came to realize, and it applies to so many situations. It was much better for the leaders there to be militarily defeated than it was to be the one to make concessions. Because if you're the one making concessions, you look weak. And that will be used against you by your political foes. And that was true there, and it's true in lots of other negotiations that I've observed or participated. It's what makes it so hard to reach diplomatic agreements. We could look at what's going on in Gaza with the Israelis. Netanyahu might have one position, but he has to worry about the right wing in the right wing people in his government, so he doesn't want to look weak to them. And I could see this in all sorts of situations that you see around the world.
Thank you very much. I hear that we have one question from the online audience. You can read it, please. Thank you.
One question for the ambassador. Are the concessions of the Serbian side in the Erdut agreement signed on the 11th November of 1995 led to the concessions by the Croatian side during the negotiations in Dayton? Question from our colleague Goran Nikolic.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are the concessions of the Serbian side in the Erdut agreement signed on the 11th November 1995 led to concessions by the Croatian side during the negotiations in Dayton?
No. Just the Erdut agreement was signed on the 12th of November. But Erdoot agreement was an essential precondition to getting Dayton, which incidentally was not really well understood by the American negotiators. It was understood by me, but I had to make the case that you could not solve Bosnia if you hadn't solved Croatia, because the Croatians wouldn't agree to a political settlement in Bosnia while Croatian territory was still under Serbian occupation or control. So it was essential. It was an essential precondition to get to a political solution in Eastern Slavonia before you got to Dayton. But I don't think the Croatians made concessions in Dayton because of Eastern Slavonia.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions, comments, perhaps? Okay, we have another question. Yes, please. We need a couple of seconds.
Yes. One question. I don't know, camera is not working, but the sounds, you can hear me. Okay. Actually, two questions. Since the main goal of diplomats are to prevent escalation, my question is: at the time when Operation Storm was prepared, was it like clear assurance from Milosevic that he will not interfere, trying to protect Croatia under the so-called Vance plan, which basically was created at the very beginning of the establishment of Croatia, meaning like disarmament of Croatia, but in return, Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, meaning Serbia and Montenegro, are obliged to protect Croatia, or that was just your prognosis that he would not interfere, meaning not your personally, but your personally plus U.S. administration. Because hypothetically, it could be the situation then Operation Storm starts, and then Milosevic used the opportunity to portray himself as a hero and the protector of Serbs, and then he do counter attack, basically pointing the finger on Vance assurances from before. That's one question. And the second question about semi-rumors, which were very present previously. Now it is almost impossible to hear that, but just to double check with you about so-called K2 approach, because many years ago, Hrvoje Šarinić, Tuđman's advisor, he mentioned on one TV show that technically what was designed in Z4 plan for Croatia should in a very similar way be applicable to Kosovo. And then he made a point, Hrvoje Šarinić, that Milosevic commented something like, I'll never give the Z4 level of autonomy to Kosovo. So was that also connected to the destiny of Serb Croatia, or that was just a kind of rumor? Thanks.
Yeah, two very good questions. So you will recall that in January of 1995, Tuđman announced that he would not extend the UNPROFOR mandate beyond its expiration at the end of, I think it was March of 95. And we then engaged in intense negotiations. I was part of it. Holbrooke was there. And then we went to the summit in Copenhagen, the social summit. Vice President Gore was there. And although it was all worked out in advance, Tuđman agreed in the meeting with Gore that they would extend the mandate to, I think it was November 30th. And I always thought that was a curious date, because by November, first, it wouldn't interfere with the tourist season in the summer of '95. And second, the weather for going from the coast up to Kraina would be favorable, but the weather for reinforcements coming from Serbia to the Kraina would be very bad. So just from a weather point of view, that would be the optimal time to launch military operations. And so I believe that was the Croatia's plan. I believe that was what Tudjman had in mind. And I think that Operation Storm took place opportunistically in August because of Srebrenica and the attack on Bihać, and his realization, well, first, he could not accept that Bihać would fall. From a strategic point of view, you would have had, I mean, the Serbs had two front lines around the Bihać pocket and then around Croatia. You get rid of the pocket, there's one front line. So that was one issue. And second, he took advantage of he took advantage of the international reaction, of the American reaction, of the fact that the Americans who wanted a greater U.S. intervention, people like Holbrooke, Albright, and me in the Bosnia, that we were in the process of prevailing in the policy argument. So he was a shrewd move on his part to advance it. We don't know. We had no advanced knowledge of whether Milosevic would intervene or not. But I think Tudjman and Milosevic probably did have a discussion, and Tudjman knew that Milosevic would not intervene in Eastern Slovenia. I think that's really very clear. And of course, as Operation Storm was being prepared, as these final negotiations were taking place, there was no mobilization in Serbia, no mobilization by the Bosnian Serbs. So, no evidence that they were going to intervene. I also think he probably knew, this took place after the NATO airstrikes, the Sarajevo marketplace massacre and so on. I think he knew that there was a high risk that if the Yugoslav army intervened, the VJ, that they would face NATO strikes. Of course, there were the sanctions. So my belief is that Milosevic had completely written off the Krajina. He was not going to hold on to that. He wanted, in fact, that he wanted it gone. And that's why he refused to support the Z4 plan. He said the Z4 plan was written by a bunch of idiots, at least privately. He told David Owen that. He didn't, even in these last-minute negotiations, he refused to see Babic. And incidentally, this came up in his trial when I testified in his case. He pretended that, well, I was on vacation wherever he was in southern Serbia. I didn't know that the U.S. charge wanted to see me because Rudy Perena was instructed to go see him. So I think that is clear, that it was understood that he would not interfere. As to whether he was afraid that the Z4 plan would provide a model for Kosovo, I don't think so. It's quite possible to agree to the Z4 plan for the Krajina and then say, well, no, but this doesn't apply to Kosovo. There's different situations. So I think the real issue is he wanted to clear up the problem of Krajina. And he was happy to have it turn out the way it did. I think he wanted to hold on to Eastern Slavonia. And in the end, he realized he couldn't, and hence we got to the Erdut agreement. I think if Croatia had attacked Eastern Slavonia, in August that the Yugoslav army would have gone in, the VJ, and that's why they didn't. I think what then followed from Operation Storm was Mistral, where the Croatian army, together with the Bosnian army, ABH, swept through western Bosnia, Herzegovina, and got up to the gates of Banja Luka. And you had the NATO airstrikes, and so I think the NATO airstrikes facilitated the ground movement of the Croatian and Bosnian army. So I think at that point, by October of 1995, Serbia would not have intervened militarily to save Eastern Slavonia, and I think that was a factor in bringing about the Erdut agreement. Because I think at that point he would have been sending in Yugoslav troops, VJ troops, would have carried in his mind, and I think in reality, a real risk of airstrikes against the Serbian troops. I'd also like to say one final thing about the history of this whole period, particularly as told by the Americans. And I was at the conference in Dayton, Ohio for the 30th anniversary of Dayton. As the Americans tell the story, it's always all about us. Wesley Clark was there. He said, it was the NATO airstrikes. NATO did everything. That's not true. The war was actually brought to an end by the Croatian military in Operation Storm. And troops on the ground are always more important than airstrikes. Yes, the airstrikes were part of it. But, did American diplomacy make a difference? Absolutely. We brokered the alliance between Croatia and Bosnia in the Washington Agreement, ended the war, brokered an alliance. We participated and brokered a part of the split agreement, in which the Croatian army then went up the Livno Valley. And we gave no light, but which the Croatians rightly understood as a green light to Operation Storm for the reasons that I described. So yes, were we decisive factors? We were, but not because of the NATO bombing. That was it helped militarily, but the decisive military action was the Croatian one. That gets to one other point that's always cited in this story, which actually hasn't come up in this webinar, is the role of MPRI and these American generals. And did they help plan the Croatian military operation? What nonsense. These, 6 retired American generals are not capable of, telling the Croatians how to conduct a military operation in this terrain. It's like somehow the Americans are all 10 feet, 3 meters tall, and everybody else are little pygmies. No. This was Operation Storm was a Croatian military operation. MPR's role in the Croatian military was short. It was involved some things that are useful to militaries, notably on budgeting and logistics and things like that. But they were not part of the military planning. They would have added nothing if they had been. Of course, the company wanted everybody to believe that they were decisive because that was going to be good for their future business. But they had no role in it.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that we are working for almost 3-4 hours. So it was really interesting discussion and webinar with lots of interesting details and opinions. Of course, it is good that we can talk and share our point of views and our impressions, especially from the generation that actually was present during and worked in during those tragic times. So with this, I would like to say that we will conclude our webinar. First of all, I would like to thank to all the participants and speakers who took part in it. I would like also to thank our audience, both who was live with us at the Institute of European Studies and also those who follow us online. And of course, I hope that that everybody could hear us very good, bearing those few technical difficulties we had at the start. And also, I would like to say that please follow our tribunes and our new programs that we are going to organize during this and the following months. Thank you very much again for your attention. Thanks once again for our participants, and see you next time. Goodbye.